everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Smarter Sourcing Podcast, Healthcare Edition. I'm Eric O'Daffer, and I'm here today with Gary Fennessy, the Chief Supply Chain Officer of Northwestern Medicine. Welcome, Gary.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Looking forward to today. This will be a fun chat.
Yeah, we're friends, and been watching you in the industry, for a long time. And just so everybody knows, this is a Smarter Sourcing as a podcast has been out there for a while across all industries. We're now bringing it to healthcare specific, and Smarter Sourcing will expand beyond that for us to mean everything supply chain from a healthcare provider lens, and maybe a few surprises along the way as we build it out. But we've got Gary today. Gary is a legend and an icon. Gary, I think by my calculation, you're the longest serving chief supply chain officer of anybody in the country, 44 years.
I've been in healthcare for 44 years. I probably didn't have supply chain for that entire time, but I kind of, as I told you before, I grew up in it. My dad worked for General Motors and supply chain, so it's kind of like I was inbred with it.
But at Northwestern for most of that time, correct?
Oh, just almost my entire career. Just almost, yeah, pretty much. I was at Loyola for a very short window time.
So how did you so you say it hasn't always been supply chain. How did you find yourself in supply chain, and when exactly did you make that tradition to the leader at Northwestern?
Well, that's a story to itself. So if you've got the time for it. So I came out of school, and I actually was a high school teacher for a very short period of time. It was one of those initiatives where you kind of come out of school and you realize, ooh, boy, I made a mistake. This wasn't for me. I found out during student teaching that this wasn't, but I also have a background in accounting too. So I wound up years ago at a company called Cooper's Librand and put some cost accounting systems in healthcare, very short window of time. And I got hired in. I went to Loyola and was a staff accountant there in the research department. And I wanted to go to graduate school, get my master's degree in accounting. And Loyola would only pay for me to go to Loyola. At the time, they were paying full tuition. So DePaul was the place I wanted to go to school. It was recognized a great accounting school. And Northwestern had an opening, and they had tuition reimbursement program. And I just took a job as a staff accountant at Northwestern in the Office of Research there. And then one thing led to another. Next thing you know, I was in finance, as a financial analyst. I was the manager of budget, and things all aligned at the time because a new CEO came in. At the time, I became the manager of budget. And I got to know Gary Mecklenburg really well because we spent a lot of time together. That led to the director of finance, director of financial planning, which put the first long-range financial plan together for the health system, for the hospital at the time, Northwest Memorial Hospital, which was the prelude to building Feinberg and Galter. Did the bond financing for that program. Spent a lot of time in New York during that period of time. And then from there, that led into working in revenue cycle. And that period of time went on. And we had a new senior VP of operations that came in. And he asked me to work with him on a series of programs that they were trying to evaluate, which we eventually closed down. And that person's name was Dean Harris. And Dean eventually became the CEO of the health system. And then one thing led to another. He moved me into operations. So I had a broad experience of everything that included supply chain. And then about 12 or 14 years ago, he came to me and said, we're going to go on an M&A activity now over the next 10 to 12 years. And he had a choice of staying in operations or doing supply chain at a corporate level. And I said, well, I can do both. And he said, no, you can't. This is going to be deeper, narrower. And he goes, and he was right. And so I chose supply chain. So, it's probably 20 plus years of really active supply chain. I was very opinionated when I was in finance supply chain. So that's probably what part of it was about. That's kind of my story. It's been a heck of a career, Eric. A lot of different things. I'm so fortunate.
So when you think about that tenure, right, and we're in a transitionary period now, it feels like, right, the supply chain in some places are making changes that sometimes make sense, sometimes don't. Financial pressures are coming in, lots of industry transition. What's your secret to 21 years of providing value in supply chain and other roles at Northwestern? How did you sustain that? What's the secret that you can share with everyone?
First of all, Northwestern is a really special place. So it was opportunities presented themselves, but I was a big believer in the grass isn't always greener on the other side. So I was very careful with those choices, and I always said, and actually Dean coached me on this because, there was a couple times I went to him and he said, do you want to be a bench player on the New York Yankees or do you want to play on like a losing team, but be the star player? And it kind of made me put it in perspective of, he's right, and where do I want to be? I would rather be part of a team that's always in the playoffs and, a star. I don't need to be the star. And so I always took that attitude as for my perspective of, I just wanted to do a really good job. And, I put my heart into the job and, I always said that when I finish up, I'm going to go in, slide and head first and own base. I'm not going to, slow up for 1 second. And so that's kind of it. I think I just kind of like never tried to be anything more than what I was. And maybe there's a certain success when you're always, I see individuals who just crash and burn on that concept. They just they're looking for the title. I was never looking for the title.
Yeah, I always talk about the value of sustained effort, right? I see this starting place at kind of 5 years into the role where people really have the trust of the organization. The organization's hired the right person and they're able to do it. When I see people that go beyond a decade, 15, 20 years, then I really think that they've done something special. And, in Chicago terms, you're the Dennis Rodman of the Bulls of Rain, right? You don't have to be Michael Jordan, but you're like, yeah, I'm right here. You're not winning without me.
And actually, that's kind of the way I think of myself. I kind of like, I just want to be that a really good bench player coming off the bench. There's a few of them like that.
You mentioned the changes and maybe nowhere, well, there's other places, maybe from different angles, but from an academic dominated medical center to what Northwestern Medicine's become and all the mergers that you mentioned, how did you navigate all that? Are there any secrets to how you think about that going forward, or for somebody that maybe is on the cusp of thinking about having to do that kind of work?
It's interesting you should say that because to a certain degree, I'm kind of like the historian here at Northwestern. I'm always reminding folks that there's a few people in this organization that had to bust through some walls, got bloody doing it, but that was the foundation for who we are. We had physician relationship issues. We had the university and the hospital sometimes fighting. We worked our way through all those issues. So, I mean, part of that, the change as I've seen though, is we went from a single hospital that was really kind of a sleepy giant waiting to happen. That's when I first came to Northwestern. That was kind of Gary Mecklenburg's describing it when he came there. And I mean, he built the foundation, which would eventually become the MMA feet. Single hospital, built Feinberg and Galter. And then Dean came on board. He really fundamentally changed the place in terms of M&A expansion, really put a lot of focus on quality, changed the way we think about ourselves. It was a very big on marketing from a perspective and thought about it from that perspective. And now we've transitioned to Dr. Chrisman, who really is trying to put us on the map on a global basis from a clinical perspective research. So that's kind of the transition I've seen over time. And, it's just, I've been lucky. I mean, I've been in the catbird seat for the whole time. And it's just, I wouldn't have traded for any, back to my point about why would I have wanted to leave to watch that. It was a great to be in the catbird seat to watch this whole thing develop.
And you more than any chief supply chain officer I know recognizes and has this connection to the CEO and talks about the CEO's vision. Other people do too, but you're really you've been consistent in that. But as you've had those relationships, you've built that trust. Are there any blocking and tackling things as you've had to assimilate these? I mean, basically, community health systems that you've acquired.
That's a really interesting question, Meg. The blocking and tackling to some degree is that I saw what needed to occur, and from a perspective of we're never going to get a lot of credit for this stuff. It's underneath the radar. No one cares about running a great procure to pay practice. But I mean, no one's getting excited. I tell the team all the time, if you're looking for a place a job where someone's going to call you up and say, "Hey, thank you so much for getting the supply to me today," ain't going to happen. That's just not going to happen here. The only calls you're going to get are going to be the complaints and recognize that if we do our job well, if we do our job well, in time, people will recognize that. And people will really recognize it at a time of crisis. And we really rose to the challenge during COVID. I stated, we stated, my quote was, we stayed 2 steps ahead of the bear, but we were always ahead of it. And we never missed a beat. We never ran out of supplies. All the work that we put into that foundation, building blocks and so forth, all that stuff really paid off. And that's when the recognition came. I'm not going to say who the executive, but one the executive said to me, he said, Gary, you saved Northwestern to me. It was probably the biggest compliment I ever heard. I still think about that all the time. And it wasn't, and I said to him, it wasn't me, it was my team. And, we were there. And there were very many similar to me. Don't get me wrong, I was dealt with there. But supply chain as an industry in healthcare really rose to the challenge.
Yeah, that's true. And you had people looking to you in areas that you didn't even have governance over at the time. I remember correctly, where they're like, okay, hey, we need you here. And you were able to swoop in and help.
Oh yeah, just you did what you had to do.
So, question, one of the things that's, I think, another hallmark of Northwestern in your leadership has been collaborations early on, maybe with distributors and GPOs, later on with the service providers and technology companies. Maybe share how your approach has changed over time, and, kind of how you feel about the collaborations, the successful collaborations.
There's no question that the softer side of Gary Fennessy has come out in the last 5 years. I mean, I was pretty hard nosed in the early days with supply chain, with vendors and management, but I started to realize, and again, that period of COVID where all of a sudden you realize those partnerships are incredibly important and those relationships are important. And, there were a few moments where I said, geez, I wish 5 years ago I had talked a little bit differently to this group. So I think that's the key to success and I will say, I think it's the key to success in the future. That healthcare just can't supply health systems can't just survive on their own. They really need to develop broader relationships in a big way. United, I always would say about building the Dreamliner. That Dreamliner didn't get built by United Airlines. That Dreamliner got built by, first of all, by Boeing. And Boeing built that with a whole bunch of partners that helped develop that vision of what they were trying to do. And I think healthcare is much the same way as where that's going to move towards. So aligning yourselves with the distributors, aligning yourselves with the GPOs, aligning yourself in a big way with your key vendors, the capital AI. Oh my goodness, the future is just so bright there. I mean, if we think about it from that perspective. And Eric, it's interesting. And again, the other side of this is too. I know that this some people are just like, geez, Gary, but that is so long. I wish I was 30 years younger. I really do, because I think this is such an incredibly exciting time. You know, to have the base of knowledge that I have, push you back 30 years, and to be able to accelerate it. I mean, we could really do something special. So I'm hoping that the new generation of leaders really lean into it in a big way.
Yeah. Well, and for you, your enthusiasm for the industry, for other people, your willingness to share, credit broadly, I think has been a hallmark of you, or at least the last 10-year Gary.
Well, yeah, I've got a lot of folks out there in the system that used to work for me, whether they, at the time there's, but really, really good people who came up through Northwestern. And I just I always used to say, and some of these individuals who are out there, they'll probably remember me telling them, my job was to throw you in the deep end of the pool and never let you drown. That's my management approach. It's my job so you never fail, you can't drown, but to give you all the opportunities to do things and be creative and try to drive that. And I think I've done a pretty good job of that over the years.
You got major health system leaders today on both coasts.
Yeah, I've got a few CFOs too from my days in finance too.
Well, that's a great legacy on that front, and we'll go back to some of that. But maybe things, you say that in the next 30 years, and I agree. Look, I think the golden age is coming still. By the foundation of leaders like you. But as you think about this, and with all the cost pressures that are coming down on health systems, are there things that you'd be directing your future self to be thinking about, areas of spend, areas of interest? Where would you be thinking about, new developments today if you had 30 more years?
One of the areas I think there's a couple ideas that come to mind is that I think most healthcare systems, and I think if I talk to my peers out there, would say there's still a lot of shadow supply chain within health systems. And so I think you've got to really continue to brand yourself as a partner that can help them transition that into supply chain to give them more time to do other things. It is never failed that anytime we go into an area and kind of take over it, or not take over it, but maybe engage, we usually identify quite a bit of opportunity. And we try to do it in a soft manner, like, like you aren't wasting your time. It's just, they're not equipped to do it. That's just the point.
And when you say shadow, is this shadow by category or shadow that of something that's still existing in one of the merged entities? What's
It's a shadow. It could be like a department who, doesn't, I mean, the area of pharmacy is an area that seems to be still not fully integrated across the country. I think it's a big opportunity. It's the fastest growing expense of most hospitals, health systems. That's one side. The second side, that when I think about back to the relationships, but I think the opportunity to work more closely with the CEOs and executives to show the value of supply chain is another area that can still be developed. I don't think we're quite where we need to be in healthcare. And then the other areas of spend that I think that are out there is that, and I'm just thinking broadly across as I see and talk to individuals, the typical areas that still fall somewhat outside of supply chain are usually, like I said, pharmacy was one, lab to some degree, facilities, construction, and IT. And some of that is in the indirect spend category. And that is the next frontier in terms of big savings. And we're starting to show some of it in some of the work that we're doing this year is that the savings we're generating in on the medical supply side the opportunities are starting to shrink. And as we spend more time on the indirect side, we're getting bigger bang for a buck. So that's kind of like, I think there's a transition that's going to start to occur.
Yeah, we've tended not to allocate our resources toward all dollars equally. And, you've been a leader too in capital, just rolling capital and the way you treat the whole, end to end life cycle management expense. It's hard, but it's another area of expense that people don't think is as big as it is. Well, let's talk about that. So you talk about technology, and where we've invested dollars. How are you thinking about investment in technology and AI? I kind of lump those together now, analytics staff to support that versus kind of the physical supply chain operations that have gotten a lot of our focus in the past. How are you seeing that balance?
Well, on a personal level, before I got on this call, I was out with my finance, our CFO, and we're talking about the ERP. And I said, I need a date for you when we think we're going to move to it, because the week before we do that is the time I'm going to retire. So that just gives you that notification because I don't, I have no intention of going through another ERP transition.
They may push it back. You just pushed it back 5 years.
So that's kind of my strategy around that. In fairness, I don't know how others feel that are kind of a little bit like myself, a little bit longer in the tooth, but the energy level I have on the AI front just isn't there. I'm pushing a lot out to my team, but it's moving so fast. I sit on a advisory board for one of our universities here in Chicago and on the business school. And they were commenting, it used to be the rule of thumb in on the technology side, or particularly in IT, was that when you started your freshman year, by the time you reached your senior year, the technology you were already outdated. That much of what you learned at those first 2 years was no longer relevant. The conversation I had recently with it was, what you learned 2 weeks ago is no longer relevant. It's moving that fast. And that's a speed of change that I think it's going to be a different type of individual that can adapt to that. And what the ripple effect of that is going to be through the health system and through the health supply chain system, I think is it's exciting and at the same time kind of scary. It's kind of like, wow, those are changes. So on the technology front, I think the speed of change and the successful supply chain officer is going to be able to adapt to quick change and be able to adapt quickly. The other areas, I think that part of the question is going to be, it comes back to AI again. how does AI affect a lot of the other technologies, like equipment, imaging, like for an example? How does that change things? Lab, my goodness, lab is going to be enormous. I mean, reading and all so forth, and the impact that has on our care teams. So again, my one word of warning that I have about healthcare and concern is the data's there. There aren't enough caregivers to manage everyone. And on a personal level, that's important to me because at some point here in the future, I'm going to need that care. And I want to make sure I got a caregiver next to me. But there just aren't going to be enough caregivers. And all the things are aligning. So there's going to have to be some real different ways of approaching managing patients and care and delivering in a very effective manner. And I'm like, it's all going to come back to there's a lot we're all leaning in on this AI in a big way to say that that's going to be the solution to this. If it's not, we're going to have a real problem, a crisis, maybe, in fact.
Yeah. It's been an interesting one because bold in the past for, chief supply chain officer, right? And we both watched it grow up from purchasing and materials management, and the combination, right, has been it. But it's still been a lot of focus on sourcing. And now this bold bet that's going to have to go to, technology and analytics is the key. And I talk about it in terms of doubling how we think about it. And it's going to take some bold bets by folks.
It's got CFOs very concerned about it too, because the money around it and the support. You listen to the business channel on the TV, and they're just the amount of investment going into this is staggering. It's just staggering, and someone's going to eventually want to return on that investment. So I'm not sure how this is all going to play out, Eric, but it's going to be an interesting. You know, like I said, I was in the catbird seat. I won't be in the catbird seat for that one. I'll be watching it from a distance, but it's going to be an interesting show to watch.
Yeah, a cheerleader with me. But we touched on a couple things already, kind of your legacy in terms of the people that you've helped develop, and your enthusiasm for the industry and willingness to share. And one maybe a little bit offbeat, but what's been the role of in your career, the role of friendship and camaraderie in your success?
Yeah, I developed a lot of really good relationships with a lot of people over time. So yeah, I think it's a key part of it. Like I love coming to work still. I love the people I work with. It's a family, you know. I lost a really good friend 3 years ago. We were college roommates through graduate school. He was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his wedding. He went up the healthcare route too. It's another reason I kind of fell into healthcare because we were best friends. He was like a brother to me, but we were also very competitive. It was a fun life. And he worked at one of the competitive hospitals here in the city, and that friendship meant a lot to me. And I tell you, losing him a couple years ago really made me reflect on the subject you just talked about, how important those relationships are and the people that I've met in this industry. And I kind of went out of my way to say, I really want to maintain those. I just don't want to walk away from this at retirement and just distance myself from those people because they've been a big part of my life.
Well, maybe that's great, and I agree. Friends and the people you surround yourself with have a huge impact on everything you do. But maybe my final question then is for you. From a legacy standpoint, what do you feel like you want your legacy to be, and what would you tell somebody who's got 30 years of runway to come do this? What would you tell them?
Well, for 30 years of runway, I would say just grab the bull by the horns and hang on. That's the only thing I can tell you. You're going to have your ups and your downs of that career, and that's part of it. And, what are some of the other simple statements that have been made? Showing up for work is 90% of it. That's one piece of it. And, if you like your job, 85% of the time, you got a really good job. You're going to have days when you're just like, why am I in this? There's been so many nights of sleeplessness. Or just wake up the next morning and say, why am I so worked up over this issue? And every time that issue would pass and you realize you just wasted time. So my legacy on this, if at the end of the day will be, if I can, someone 5 years from now will say, you know, we took what Gary had built and we built on top of it. He built foundation. Just like I said, I've watched our CEOs, everyone over time has made an impact. And then the next generation can take that and put another layer on top of it. And the next generation could put a layer on top of that. That to me that's a great legacy that there was a foundation here that they could build off of. Don't don't break what was there. There's no need to break it. I mean, there's no question about it that someone's going to come in and going to work around the edges, I think. But if I leave it at the core, that's a great legacy from my perspective.
Well, that's terrific. I'm 100% positive that that's the case. Somebody's gonna come into Northwestern and stand on your shoulders and build that.
And wanted to be really successful too. I really do. I like bring it to a whole nother level. That's great.
Well, with that, I'll just say thank you to you, Gary. Thanks for everything that you've done for the healthcare supply industry. Thanks for joining us today.
And then I got to have the final comment here. You know me, I got to have the final word.
Perfect. All yours.
Got to have the final word, Eric. Sorry. That's just who I am. I got to just say a special thank you to you because you've really made an impact in our industries. You've always been someone who's trying to drive us to think differently and to bring it to the next level. I can't say enough about the work you've done and your friendship too over the years. I always look to you too. If I've got a crazy idea, somebody else out there as crazy as me that wants to do something like this. So just thank you and continued success to you, Eric, too.
Well, I'll keep trying to make you proud to the extent that I've made you proud and appreciate your kind and generous comments. And thanks everybody for listening. This has been Smarter Sourcing Healthcare Inaugural Edition with me, Eric O'Daffer and Gary Fennessy. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks.